bookseller here, where we now host in-person and virtual events, along with partnered and supported events, trips, and classes. For a full list of everything, please go to our website, politics-prose.com. Before we get started today, I'd just like you to please silence your cell phones so as not to disrupt the event. When we get to the time for opening the floor to the questions, we place the standing microphone at the end of the aisle to your right, just behind this pillar here. When you're asking a question, please speak clearly into the microphone. We are both audio and video recording, live streaming today's program, so that you or anyone you know can find it on the Politics and Prose YouTube channel. Following the Q&A, we'll have a sign up here at this table. So if you've not already purchased the book, we have loads of copies behind the registers at the front of the store. We will ask you to line up on this side of the pillar, and we'll come by and ask your name for personalizations. So please have your books ready for us. So without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome Aleksandar Hemon. Hemon is the author of The Lazarus Project, which was a finalist for the 2008 National Book Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award and a New York Times bestseller. His accolades include receiving a Genius Grant from the MacArthur Foundation, a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Penn W.G. Sebald Award for a fiction writer in mid-career, and the John Dos Passos Prize for Literature, and he teaches at Princeton University. Today we are discussing and celebrating his latest novel, The World and All It Holds, which has been called hilarious, heartbreaking, erotic, and philosophical. Hemon will be in conversation with Aminata Fauna, the award-winning author of the novels Happiness, The Hired Man, The Memory of Love, and Ancestor Stones. She is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and the recipient of the Wyndham Campbell Award. She is currently director of the Lannan Center of Poetics and Social Practice at Georgetown University. So please welcome Aleksandar Hemon and Aminata Fauna. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you all here. And thank you for coming. And welcome, Sasha.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. It's a great bookstore. I love coming here.
You and I have been in conversation before. And some of the themes in the book, I think we've also talked about before in different ways. The use of language and the unraveling of nation states. And those are some of the things I want to talk to you about today. But I was just thinking, you know, at some point, one of us is going to have to start by saying what this book is about, by trying to summarize it.
I'd like to know too.
And I thought that I would have a go. Right. So to me, this is a book about love and a book about war. And it's an intensely beautiful book. I am not a weeper, but I cried quite a few times at the beauty of the sentences, but also the emotional heft of the book. It's a book of deep emotional content. And as I was reading it, there were various moments where I thought, no, this is it, this sums it up. But actually, I eventually decided on what I thought was really the emotional register of the book, which is for everything God created, he created its counterpart. And I think that is what the book's about. It's about the best and the worst of mankind.
It is exactly that. If you think that the best of mankind is love, which I do. After I'd written the book, I came upon this quote from Hannah Arendt, whose last work, published in 1979 or so, was on love. And she said, love is the weight of the soul. And I find that incredibly beautiful. At the same time, I mean, the thing with human beings is that we are capable of all this, these books, this enormous amount of thought about life and the world and the need to communicate and the ability to reinvent language with each sentence. Everybody does that all the time. At the same time, you know, there are Putins and Trumps and sociopaths who move large populations just to kill other people. And so this paradox, I mean, it's obvious to all of us. No one is surprised by this, nor is it any kind of profound philosophical thought. But then the issue becomes, to me, what interested me at some point is that what are the limits of love? I mean, how do people love under such difficult circumstances, right? You know, the mythology of love in popular culture is that people are single and then they meet someone and then they're happier when they were single, and they were not happy when they were single because they were single. But there's the only pressure is this need to be with someone else, so to speak. I mean, it's legitimate. That's how people are in the world. But what if it is really hard to be physically with someone, right? And the love in this book is between two men, a Jewish man, a Jewish Sephardic man, that's redundant, a Sephardic man from Sarajevo, Rafael Pinto, and Osman Kadishev, who's a Bosnian, also of Muslim background. They meet in the army, the Austro-Hungarian army, after World War I starts, and then the book follows them with some complications for the next few decades. And whatever love they practice as they're moving east from Sarajevo towards Shanghai through most difficult and trying circumstances where the primary goal is just to stay alive, because you have to be alive for love, at least one of the people in the couple. And so the original, let me say this and then I'll maybe read from the beginning. I signed the contract for this book on proposal in 2010 with my British publisher for some reason. In the proposal, which I read once since then, they were friends, Osman and Pinto. And at some point, and I don't remember the moment or the reason or the logic, except kind of retroactively, I decided that they should be lovers. And I think it was because I wanted to see, how possible it is to love someone while the world is constantly crashing on top of your head, and then as soon as it's rebuilt in some ways, then it crashes again, and then again, and then again. And so, as I was writing, what that changed, deciding that they would be lovers, for me, it inserted into the book this kind of endless variety of human love. Because even in the stable circumstances, love is ever changing. It always requires adjustments to, it needs to adjust to the new set of circumstances, whatever it is. And so I started loving them, these two men, and there's a daughter that appears at some point. I started loving them intensely. Now I'm in this strange phase where, I have to share them with other people. And they're kind of leaving. It's like children going to college or going to war, God forbid. So thank you. I hope you take care of them when you meet them.
Well, they are deeply lovable characters. And before you read, I'd just like to ask you, since you and I both come from countries that have experienced recent civil conflicts, yours the former Yugoslavia, Bosnia specifically, and me, Sierra Leone. And I was reminded of something reading this book, that all the time I was going to and from Sierra Leone during the end of the conflict. I wasn't there at the beginning of it, but I was at the end of it. And one of the things I did was I started to teach creative writing classes through the British Council. And people would come to the classes and, then I thought that everybody would want to write about their experience of war. Right? I thought they would want to, write it out, right? Get it off their chest. And actually, everybody in my classes wrote love stories. And I just wondered what you made of that, and whether love is the way we survive war, but also the fact that in war, people do continue to love. And one of the things I discovered about, experiencing war almost firsthand, is that life went on. People still fell in love, people still got married, people still had babies, people still mourned people who had died.
Yes, absolutely. I think there are, in fact, studies somewhere that show that, kind of catastrophe in a country or a place, a region, does not lead to reduction in love and procreation. And, it makes sense kind of evolutionally. The more difficult it is, the more people need to reproduce the species. But also at an emotional level, this kind of intense violence and destruction of the structure of the world around you allows you, that's not the word, makes you turn to the people who are closest to you, right? And people in Sarajevo under siege, they lived with each other all the time. I mean, it's the ultimate test of marriage, right? You're under siege together, like it's, the next test is vacation, but the siege takes the cake. And so my best friend got married in the war, and he's still happily married. But in the middle of it all, they got married, and they ran under sniper fire to a hotel where there was where journalists were staying, and there was a French journalist who was shocked because they were drinking and kissing and maybe even singing. The French journalist was shocked. What is this? What's the party? And they said, we just got married. And he was so amazed that people would not only get married but celebrate, right? That he gave them a bottle of French wine, which at that time was, in that situation, was enormously valuable. And then they, and I don't mean to imply anything about this, but the bottle of wine was unopened for a long time, and then it went bad because it was not, the exact top. It wasn't kept in the right circumstance. But people kept living through it. The amazing thing about humans, we live through things, right? If you can. Of course, we try to live through things. There's this, even people who have become adults in relatively privileged circumstances, they can learn, and there's a horrible price for that. They can learn to live in a different set of circumstances. I talked to writers in Ukraine, and the mental strength and how would I put it, the intelligence with which they adjust to new circumstances is quite amazing. But of course, the price is the death and destruction. I mean, the price is not worth it, obviously. But people find ways to reorganize their own mental and emotional lives in the most difficult of circumstances.
And I suppose the time we most recently did that, of course, was lockdown, during which you produced a book, much to the envy of every other writer in the United States, I think, since most of us went into a state of stasis. Is that how you survived lockdown?
Well, I get hypomanic under stress when I thrive under duress. So I wrote a book, I started producing music, and also I started writing poetry. And so, because I had this compulsion to make stuff under that duress, right? I was at Princeton dismissed the students. It was totally empty. It was like, The Last of Us without zombies. Not even zombies were there. And so I fought my way into my office, and was the only person in the building for about a year or so, maybe even more. And every day I would go to my office and make stuff, write a book, write poetry, or produce music. And that's how I survived.
Super. Now, would you read for us?
I would love to. Thank you. This is from the very beginning, and the book begins on June 28, 1914, when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife visit Sarajevo. It did not turn out well for them. The Holy One kept creating worlds and destroying them, and then, just before giving up, he finally came up with this one. It could be much worse, this world, and all that it holds, as I certainly know how to get my hands on some interesting stuff around here. Let's see. Lapis infernalis, laudanum, next to it lavender. Pinto took the laudanum off the shelf, knocking over the lavender tin, which miraculously did not break open when it hit the floor. He released a drop of laudanum onto a sugar lump, watched the brown stain bloom, then placed it in his mouth. While the sugar and bitterness dissolved on his tongue, he picked up the lavender, dipped his nose into the tin, and inhaled. Vast Mediterranean flower fields stretched inside him, the blue sea lapping at his soul, a turquoise sky and swallows floating above it all, the laudanum sailing on his blood, all the way to his mind, and then beyond, to all the things created at twilight on the Shabbat Eve. The Lord wisely added laudanum just to help make everything more beautiful and bearable. Now was Rafael Pinto much better prepared for the Archduke Franz Ferdinand von Österreich-Este, heir apparent to Habsburg Empire, Inspector General of the Imperial Armed Forces, and for the whole spectacle he was bringing to Sarajevo, just to see how we live here. We live rather well, Your Highness, I must say, provided there's enough laudanum and lavender on hand. Thank you very much for your kind concern. And since this is an enterprise of providing remedy for the body as much as for the soul, we're sure to have plenty of whatever we might need. Long live the Emperor, the Lord be praised, and bless you too. After a drab, rainy week, the morning was sunny, and the light broke through the windows as never before, rearranging the checkered floor into unprecedented patterns. The sugar was now completely dissolved, but the bitterness lingered, tickling his tongue. God wrapped himself in white garments, and the radiance of his majesty illuminated the world. And right here on the floor of the Apotheke Pinto, we can now behold a little patch of one of those very garments. There might be a poem for me to write about the light shifting, altering the visible. God's garments, it could be called. But then who would ever care about any of it? No one cares about light and what it does to the soul, not here in the city, behind God's back. And then into his store, a handsome Austrian Rittmeister walks in, and Pinto flirts with him. And when the Rittmeister leaves the pharmacy, the apotheke, Pinto follows, locks up the store, goes out. Returning to the ongoing world was a magnificent thing to do, this splendid rolling forward into the future in obeisance to his heart and desire, away from or deeper into his own life, into a brilliant reticulation of unknown outcomes toward Kaspar. We named him Kaspar for some reason. To the place my heart must learn to love, there my feet take me. He could see the hackle on the helmet passing over the crowd. Kaspar was very tall, and he stopped at a corner. If he could find a pathway to him, he could say, Herr Rittmeister, it gives me enormous pleasure to inform you that the royal banner is presently proudly fluttering above the door of Apotheke Pinto. And if you would like me to show you our humble city and its charcia, just say a word and I am yours. Or I could make you a cup of buzzing coffee in the back of my apotheke, where it is quiet and no one would bother us. Just say a word. A clamor emerged from the crowd that suggested that something was unfolding, but Pinto just kept pushing deeper into it until he was forced to stop. There were two men now between him and the Rittmeister, at least one of them reeking of wood smoke. There was an odd, mangy dog there too, pushing its way among people, as if on a mission. The Rittmeister stuck out in the crowd, with his gorgeous uniform lit up from inside by his heroic beauty. Pinto wanted him to turn around, see him in his wake, see him carried forth by desire. From behind, Pinto perceived the shining skin on Kaspar's shaven cheek, and the point of his left mustache marking the spot where the dimple would be, and the straight horizontal hairline at the top of his neck. He envisioned two moves, parting the men, addressing the Rittmeister, that would get him close enough to inhale his rose scent. Instead, he inhaled the rancid smoke and sweat reek of the men before him. One of them was clearly an adeptus, overgrown hair sprouting from under his filthy loose collar. The dog must have been his. Off the other one's shoulder, an accordion hung like a dead animal, one key missing on the keyboard. A car as big as a locomotive turned sharply from the Apelke and halted right before the Rittmeister, and Pinto instantly identified on the back seat the real Archduke, a helmet with peacock feathers over a gold collar with 3 silver stars, and the Duchess in a dress so white it might have been fashioned from God's garment itself, an even whiter hat with a veil, a bouquet of blue and white and yellow flowers in her arms. History recorded that it was a gift from a Muslim girl, which for some reason brings tears to my eyes. It appeared to him that Her Majesty smiled at Kaspar through the veil, as though recognizing him, while he bowed his head to her, and again Pinto's heart raced ahead, and he had to take a deep breath lest he faint. To the right of Pinto, a short young man, his hair also unkempt, a thin strained mustache above his lip, his eyes sickly, pulled out a pistol. For a moment, no one could do anything nor move. Even the dog stared at him in bafflement, while all of the reality hinged on that incongruous detail of a barrel pointed directly at their Imperial Highnesses. The Rittmeister's face tightened in stupefaction, the whole of it, the eyebrows and the mouth and the eyes, somehow constricted and became bigger at the same time. The adeptus reached for the young man's gun, tiny tufts of hair on his fingers between his knuckles, and would have grabbed it if the other man hadn't bumped him aside with his accordion, whereupon the shots rang louder than the cannon salvo, and then the world exploded. Thank you.
You've written about that moment before.
I have, yes.
Apart from the fact that you're from Sarajevo yourself, what is it that captures you about it? And I also wonder, in this book, the two of them, the Rittmeister and Pinto, they understand what is going to happen, right? They understand that this is the beginning of the end. But I just wondered, in from your life, from growing up in Sarajevo, where that story has such a resonance for the population, whether there is a sense that people at that time actually knew that things would never be the same again.
I don't know if they knew. I don't think anyone quite knew. And what I've learned, and many of us from Sarajevo, from my experience before the war, is that you could simultaneously know and not know. So I was working as a journalist, and I knew that I knew a lot of facts. I knew there were troop movements, and there was smuggling. The Serbs were smuggling arms and all this, and yet to accept before it actually happens that your life as you know it, and everyone else's, mind you, is going to crash, and that it's inevitable, probably, it requires a different kind of consciousness about everything. It requires to make decisions, and I think it's akin to the fact that human consciousness can imagine death while reading a book, but to imagine your own extinction as a person, the moment of that, it's not easy. In fact, it's impossible, because if we could, it would be very difficult to live. So we defer this until the very last moment, even if then, I think, could be surprised. And so a lot of us, other than people who were actually preparing the thing, thought, you knew what you needed to know, but you also didn't want to know what you needed to know. And so you not quite ignore the fact, but look for, how would I put it, better interpretations, more positive interpretations of the fact. My mother, I left Sarajevo just before the siege, and my mother and father stayed until the very last minute, pretty much. They left on the day that the city was fully enclosed. And I would call it, so this happened in the beginning of May. But in April, there was a lot of shooting in Sarajevo, and so I would call them from Chicago, and my mother I would say, "How are things?" I said, "Oh, it's okay." And then I would hear the shooting over the phone. I said, "What is that? Is that shooting?" And she said, "Oh, they're already shooting less than yesterday." Like shooting was like weather. So, there's already less snow today than yesterday because the spring has come. And so everyone in many ways thinks like that, I think, at least people who are not preparing the crime. And so in that respect, I don't think that anyone quite knew, right? Now, if you look at it retroactively, it was clear that the imperial system, the empire, the Austrian Empire was rotten and was going to collapse. But it didn't look like that when the Archduke came to Sarajevo, right? And it could be instructive to us at this time here. And at the moment of the beginning of the book, most of the world is governed by 4 empires, right? The British Empire, the Turkish Empire, the Austrian Empire, and the Russian Empire. Within 5 years, 3 of them are gone. And not just the empires, but the whole social order that had lasted for hundreds of years, right? The divine right of kings, the whole way that people imagine states and human organization, it just vanished in 5 years. And we think that all this country and the democracy and the global order are just going to go on, because why not? It's been like that for a long time. And we cannot imagine what it would be like if that collapses, and it would be like imagining your own death. And so we will not imagine it until the very last moment. Much of the Democratic Party is refusing to imagine what's already happening. But let's not get into that.
No, let's not get into that till a bit later down the interview, because we've talked about it. And you and I are kind of on the same page on that one. But you did imagine what it was like for Pinto and Osman to cross land after land after land, which, where the old order was disintegrating. And it is notable that there are no... They never get to a border checkpoint, for example. They move through different situations. They move through different, warlords or groups of people in power. They move through different landscapes, be it mountain or snow or desert. They make their way all the way. Well, Pinto makes his way all the way across the continent. So you did, in fact, imagine what it was like to be in a world without any kind of safety structure, political safety structure.
Yes, as you were suggesting earlier, at no point do they pass through anything even remotely resembling a nation state or a functioning society. because there was a time, it starts in 1914 and lasts roughly until 1949. There's an epilogue much later, but and they passed through the first half of the 20th century. It was not, it was not the highlight of human existence on this planet, those 50 years. But that allowed, because there are no, what happens in a state, whatever it might be like, there's some, at least semblance of protection of individual people. There are signs to say, do not turn left here because you might be hit by a truck. And if you don't have that, then you're on your own. It's all survival. I wanted to, with this book, I think that the fundamental narrative structure is epic. That is that for thousands of years, from Gilgamesh on, and in terms of the literature we have saved, you have people moving through space and then stories coming out of it, right? It is kind of basic structure of running into obstacles and overcoming them or not, right? The Odyssey is like that. Don Quixote, On the Road, right? It's the fundamental and kind of evolutionally determined structure. I think that wherever there's migration, there's narration. In fact, I have my own little formula for personal use. Narration is migration squared. You have to settle at some point to be, or at least for a week, to come up with a story about the road or the journey that you have made up to that point. And so as Pinto and Osman move through this landscape, it is stripped, as it were. I mean, I didn't strip it. Those were the times. It was entirely historically plausible, everything that happens out of the enormous amount of historical research. They pass through these challenges, right? And that in itself generates stories, but it tests the love that they feel for each other. That is another way to describe this basic epic structure is perhaps love and obstacles. I once published a book named Love and Obstacle. And so I wanted to have them move through the world and see what happens to them and what happens to their love.
I'm reminded listening to you that I interviewed Isabel Allende, and she talked about the fact that she had been asked why so many of her novels centered around families, right? Extended families and the politics and relationships within families. And she said, well, when you come from a country where there is no social net, right, no social safety net, and there is no working government, the family becomes your safety net, right? All you have to rely on is the family. So I was thinking about that because this is what Osman and Pinto go through. For a start, they join other people's families at some point, but they also have a family of their own. There's a daughter, and Pinto devotes, and Osman too, although he is somehow in a different realm, Osman and Pinto devote their life to keeping her alive.
Yes, I mean, it is historically, queer people have relied on found families rather than biological families, because the biological families were not always kind to them historically. And so there's this tradition of, and I think it's a beautiful way to have a family, is to find the people you love and create a family with them, rather than be defined by the biological determinism, as it were. And this is, of course, exacerbated by the fact that things are falling apart everywhere around them, right? Pinto at some point effectively has a choice of taking the child who lost her mother at birth and taking care of her or not, right? So he does, because he's capable of love, and he takes care of her, partly because he imagines that Osman might be her biological father, and at that time they're separated. And so that the residue of their love is already lodged or placed in that little girl whose name is Rahela. And so that his love for Rahela is also his love for Osman, right? And Osman is present, but not quite physically in all that. And so he carries her through the world. And in the epilogue, you see what happens to her.
Pinto's love for Osman is so intense that, we all love Osman, I think. I mean, he seems, through Pinto, we feel very deeply about Osman. And Osman is handsome, and he's Bosnian and a soldier, and he's sort of a clearer hero than Pinto, who we also love. But Pinto, on the surface, on the face of it, is a interesting and curious little. I mean, I don't know. I always imagined Pinto to be little. Is he little?
Well, not little, but he's not tall. He's kind of self-contained.
I imagined him to be a small man, but he is anyway a Sephardic Jewish Vienna educated pharmacist. He's a homosexual, and he's an opium user, an enthusiastic opium user. And I just wondered what the inspiration for Pinto was. He's a very complex person.
I hope so. I don't know if there was a specific person with inspiration, but one of the sources in the sense that I started thinking about it for the book was I've discovered this before the war. There's an album by a woman named Flori Jagoda called Memories of Sarajevo. Flori Jagoda survived the Holocaust. She was born and raised in Sarajevo, and as a young woman, and one of the few people of Jewish background who survived the Holocaust in Sarajevo. She left in 1947 and lived in Baltimore. She died a couple of years ago at the age of 96 or so. But sometime in the 80s, and since she left Sarajevo, she sang these songs that her grandmother sang to her. And eventually, I think, this is a story as I heard it, her family talked her into recording an album, and the album was called Memories of Sarajevo. You can find it on YouTube. And she recorded another album in her 70s, I think, or certainly 60s. It was called songs in Ladino, Canticas de Mia Nonna, something like that, the songs of my grandmother. And this album, Memories of Sarajevo, is just so beautiful. And it's about Sarajevo, but also she pronounces words in Ladino, which is the language of the Sephardim. With the particularly soft way that Sarajevans and Bosnians pronounce the ch, like this is what we say. And so when I listened to that before the war, and I loved it, and I listened to it ever since, but I just, I mean, for kind of obvious reasons, wanted to, the world in which she lived had entirely vanished with the Holocaust and the changes, right? The people who survived, the Jewish people survived the Holocaust in Sarajevo. Many of them left for Israel. That means maybe 1,000 or so. I don't know the numbers. And then whoever was left, many of them left with the siege of Sarajevo. So the world in which she lived in entirely vanished. But yet she retained it in music and these songs. And I cannot say that I was reconstructing it, but I was imagining it. The entrance into that, for me, was her voice and her beautiful songs. And so I wanted to, because of her, I wanted to have a character who's a Sarajevan Sepharad, so someone who would be from that world and then lose it, and that would and lose it as a Bosnian, as a Sarajevan, but also as a Jewish person, and that was the beginning of Pinto. But then I read books, and I read Memories of Sarajevo, the Sarajevan Jewish population, and started imagining from scratch. And then at some point he was there.
So when was that? Because you had the idea for this book in 2010, but you started writing it at least a decade later. So when did Pinto? Where did the book start? If it didn't, did it start with Pinto? Did you have him in 2010, or did he come in?
I had both.
You had him in 2010.
Yeah, I don't know when it started because I had a proposal in 2010, which means that it was formulated enough.
Right.
I could write 4 pages, and the journey from Sarajevo to Shanghai was all of it was there. All of the stops that they make in the book was in the proposal. But I don't know what the inception point was. It was maybe at least, I would say at least 15 years now that I've been working on it in various ways. There's a point when you start putting words on the page, and shortly after the proposal, I started working on the first chapter and second chapter. I may have even written some of the things, but I don't measure those things because I don't think in drafts or page numbers. It's all just one big, messy, organic operation. It's all shit until it isn't, and so that's the operating principle. That's my method.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to think about, at what point a writer knows they have a book. I always think, with me, it tends to be a question that is bothering me, and then at some point, it either goes on bothering me forever, or at some point, I find a vehicle for it. It's usually a character Right, that's how it begins for me. But I just kind of think of these things, you get little sparks, and at some point they all start joining up and catch fire, and then you think, I've got a book here, right? This is more than a short story, it's more than a poem, it's more than a song, it's a novel. And I just wonder what the different elements of it were that came together with this, the journey, Pinto.
I think Pinto was first, because I wrote the first chapter. He emerged pretty clearly. I liked his, poetic. One of the things that I made, one of the decisions that I made early was that he would be multilingual, right? Which was.
And we're going to talk about that.
Which was common in Sarajevo at any point, but particularly at the time when the empires were, present. And so Bosnia was part of the Ottoman Empire until 1878. Then the Austro-Hungarian Empire occupied it and held it until it fell apart. So people in Sarajevo at the time would have been speaking several languages, never mind that different dialects that are now different languages in the Balkans. So Pinto was always going to be multilingual. He was always going to speak Ladino or Spanish, as they called it in Sarajevo, the language of Sephardic Jews. He would speak German because he would be. I decided he would be a Viennese student, and then he would. As he moved and passed all this, geographical world, through the world, he would pick up languages along the way. So that was an early decision, and much of that was already present in the draft of the first chapter, which I wrote shortly thereafter. Once I had Pinto, I had to keep him moving to see what happens to him, and then I need to write a book to see what happens in it. And what it is about. There's the great American photographer Gary Winogrand once said, "I photograph things to see what things look like photographed," and that to me is fantastic. I'm paraphrasing it slightly, but that's pretty much exactly what it said. I need to write a story or a book to see what happens in it. There are people, and that's absolutely legitimate and good if they can do it. I do not think everything up before I start writing. So I just need to have an entry point and have a kind of delimit the space. And it's rather large space here between Sarajevo and Shanghai. And then I move them through that space and to see what happens. And then things happen.
Can we talk a bit more about language? Those that I counted, Spanish, Bosnian, German, French, English. I guess at some point they go to Shanghai, so languages of those places, that place must be included. But can you talk me through something? Because there are passages in the book in different languages. I might ask you to read a little bit, actually, but there are passages in different languages. And you obviously made a creative decision about how much translation you were going to use, how you were going to work with the code switching, how much you were going to let your readers figure it out for themselves. And there were times, actually a lot of the time I understood what was being said, and I couldn't always tell whether that was because I do have some Spanish and I do have some French. But then there was a whole passage in German and I understood it, and I don't have any German at all. So I was pleased with myself, but
I put it there for you, I'm not.
Also, really think, how did he do it? Would you just read a tiny bit for us? I've marked it for you. And then we could talk a little bit about how you use language in the book and what decisions you made. And then, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, 5 minutes time, I'm going to go to questions.
Just to set it up a little. So Pinto and Osman, they're prisoners of war in Tashkent, Central Asia, because they were captured by the Russians. They fought for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In what is for the empire was Eastern Front in what is now Ukraine, near Brody. They ended up in Tashkent as prisoners of war, and then when the revolution started, a lot of prisoners were released, and they took up. They became friends with a family, Russian-speaking family, Jewish family. The father is Isaac Abramovich, his wife is dead, and his daughter is Klara Isakovna, and they are friends, and they go to see them, and there's a they involved in a spy operation, but that's a different story. But anyway, Klara Isakovna, she's 18 or so, and this is a passage about her. For one thing, she was only 18, barely a woman. Not so long ago, Pinto was the one whom she had asked to speak German with her, to tell her stories of the strange country he came from, of his family, of his student years in Vienna, of the passionate life and adventures he had there. He would come by the Boymes. The Boym is the name of last name of the family. He would come by the Boymes without Osman, and they would huddle, he and Klara Isakovna, by the tiled stove, replenishing their tea from the samovar, and talk about the endlessness of elsewhere. She could not stop considering the terrible fact that there was a world out there existing and changing without her, a world she passionately believed she could reach only by way of learning a new language. In response, Pinto would recite the only Heine poem he knew by heart, passed on to him in Vienna by a mouthy, drunken student with delicious curl on his forehead. I will spare you from reading Heine in German with my accent. So, but it's there, the Heine poem in German.
It wasn't the bit I understood, I have to say. But so talk us through what your decision-making process was, because this book also just touched on the idea of voice, because this book has an incredibly distinctive voice. I mean, actually, all your work has a very distinctive voice, and the voice is different from book to book. And I'd like to know both things. Number one, how did you make the decisions, sentence by sentence, page by page? But also, when you're creating the voice for a book, do you hear it first, and do you ever abandon a work because you can't get the voice right? I mean, how crucial is voice to it?
I never abandon it. It might take a long time, but in all of my writing life, I killed one story after I've written it. I just sit, it doesn't work now, I'll just wait for 10, 12 years, it'll work out. But a voice, I mean, I don't really think in terms of a voice as separate from the character or from the consciousness that is underpinning, and it's consciousness in quotation marks, in a sense that it's not necessarily my consciousness, but that the book creates a space into which for a different consciousness, and call it a writerly consciousness, or my consciousness plus the consciousnesses of the people in the book, and the language that whole setup requires. And so, because Pinto was always going to be multilingual, I had to make his consciousness multilingual. And because all those languages are constitutive parts of his consciousness, he wouldn't be translating things to himself just randomly, right? He could do it sometimes to just test, as he does often, there's a passage where he thinks of all the words for the stork, the bird, that he knows. In Ladino, in German, and in Bosnian, and also in French, he learned it somewhere. And the stork for him fully exists only when all of those words are referring to it. And so it is, in my experience as a multilingual, but I speak fewer languages than Pinto person, I think a multilingual consciousness or mind, whether it's a child's mind or an old person like me, aging rapidly, it's a multidimensional entity, right? And to represent that entity in a single language is to reduce the dimensions. In a two-dimensional system, right, a multidimensional object can only be represented in 2 dimensions. So I decided to kind of risk it, knowing that people, I don't know, I wasn't knowing, but I was aware of the risk that people would not necessarily enjoy the fact that there would be some words and languages that they did not understand. But that's the price of having access to Pinto's mind, on the one hand. On the other hand, I love books. My favorite books are the books that kind of teach you how to read them. And I don't mean condescendingly, but in the sense that whenever we start a book, we come with a set of expectations and reading habits, right? And then we negotiate with the book. And it's absolutely fair, right? If you're expecting a crime novel, it's not a crime novel, you don't want to read it. But there are books that require, that have the ability to attract me so that I start questioning my, starting premises, how books should work, how language should work, how these things should. And I love the books that make me at some point abandon all of those habits, not abandon, but suspend, let's say. And then I have to learn the rules of that particular world and that particular narrative mode. And that is, to me, the best transformative, the best experience of reading, because it's fundamentally transformative. I actually have a sense that I'm learning something. Now, I don't mean in a kind of academic sense, something that I could write a report on, but that I've gone through an experience that changed me as a person, right? And there are books which are fun to read too, that confirm everything you already know, and just send it back to you. And those are on the entertainment end of the range. And I wanted, in other words, I wanted to. There are phrases that are never translated, but I thought that if you read the book, you will understand what the phrase means. So there's Pinto used the phrase "la gran oscuridad" in Ladino, which the grand obscurity, the great unknown, the great oblivion. It's never pinned to an exact translation, but it requires that it aggregates meaning as it passes through the book of Pinto.
I am going to ask you if your editors were on board with all of that, but before we go there,
They had no choice.
are there any questions? And if there are, would you please use the mic here? It's just behind the pillar. And that's for the purpose of the live streaming that's taking place. And what did your editors say? Can I also ask you, don't be shy, folks. Can I also ask you, you made a decision to raise your own kids bilingual, and we've talked about, the difference that makes to the human brain, bilingualism. And I wonder about that in terms of Pinto. But don't answer my question yet, because you've got two from the audience.
Thank you. I love the book, but I wonder, you've talked about Pinto and Osman being taken captive by the Russians at Brody, and I wonder if that was tied in any way to Josef Roth, who was from Brody.
Well, it wasn't directly tied, but I love Josef Roth and read his books, The Radetzky March, and it wasn't directly tied to him, no. But I was aware that he was from Brody. They never quite make it to Brody. Brody's burning on the horizon. Yeah, they're in the trenches.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is similar, actually. One of the things about Radetzky March is it paints the Austro-Hungarian Empire in a kind of rosy way, especially for minorities like Jews. And so I was wondering, we know that there are, slightly more beneficent empires and less so. I was wondering, with all the things that you've been through, where do you stand on an imperial versus nation state continuum?
Well, I mean, I can make no decisions in relation to that. If I could pick one over the other, I don't know what I would pick. The fact of the matter is that, because people live under all circumstances, they make the best of it in any way they can. This day, as all Bosnians know, the words for simple technologies like zipper or screwdriver or a vent are all in German. Reißverschluss, Schraubzieher are Bosnian words for the zipper and the screwdriver, because the Austro-Hungarians brought it in, right? And they built railroads and such things. The Ottoman Empire was not that interested in that, and they were also failing, didn't have the technology, and so the Turkish words are all about soul and pleasure in Bosnia. Not all of them, but many of them. All of this word that I love, including, there's a word which is Bosnian, not quite Turkish, but it comes from Turkish akşam, which is evening. There's a word akşamlık, which is my favorite Bosnian words, which is the feeling that you have in the evening, which with a little bit of food and drink ideal. But this is the Germans brought technology right now, but they did it not out of the kindness of their heart. They did it so they could cut the forest and exploit resources. This is how it works. And so people who lived then, they found a way to make the best of it. They went to Vienna to study, and pharmacy, as Pinto did. His father didn't. His father knew the folksy ways of herbs and potions and poultices and such things. But Pinto went to university in Vienna. And so, in that sense, I mean, from a point of view of political theory, I don't know what is better. It's better they can both be bad, and they can find some good pockets or have some good pockets within the system. But from the point of view of human life and experience, people live and make the best of it. And that I'm in the business of human experience, not political science.
Is there another question? Can we talk then, while we're waiting to see if somebody does, can we talk then about the way in which the brain is changed by bilingualism and your decision to raise your own children bilingual. Inspired by that, I did make the attempt with my son, but somewhat less successfully, I think. But I did send him Spanish lessons from the age of 2. But I just wondered whether, with Pinto, because he has that brain elasticity or plasticity, was there any kind of conscious decision that that's what helps him survive the continually changing circumstance he finds himself in?
I don't know it's directly related to that, but he has, his mind is unlike any other, and that's a kind of minimum requirement for me for a narrative about a person, right? And so, much of so-called 19th century realist fiction is rooted in a desire for typicality. So you pick a hero who is typical in some way, usually of the bourgeoisie. And some great books are, like that, whatever. The Stendhal book, the Red and Black, right? Julien, what's his last name? I can't remember now. He's Sorel, of course. He represents this, social climber, and then in his passing through, it's also obstacles, but not in geography, but in society. He exposes other types, and so that allows for a cross-section projection of a society, right? And there are many writers who do it to this day. Jonathan Franzen, and all of his books are about that. And I mean, this Let a Thousand Flowers Bloom. I don't see those books as my enemies or anything like that. But my sensibility is such that I want to move away from typicality, so that Pinto doesn't stand for any population. He suffers from what we would call today intersectionality. He's many things at once, right? And he has to juggle them simultaneously in various ways, even while he's in the desert surviving. And so the reason why I wanted my children to be bilingual, and it's mainly French. My older daughter is fluent in French. She speaks a little Bosnian, also Mandarin, and is now learning German and Spanish, is because I want their brains to be able to be used to the possibility that everything is multifaceted and multidimensional. And studies have shown that children who are raised bilingual, their brains work slightly different, and not necessarily better or in superior way to some other brains, just differently, because it requires many things for a brain or mind to be good and successful, not just practice. But the way it works, the brain tests various is more likely to be able to test various possibilities rather than take a single possibility as an answer. So if you're monolingual, there's only one word for the thing. I mean, this is gross simplification. But if you're multilingual, you go through the possibilities. Which word is applicable in this particular situation? And this is what Pinto does. It makes him one of the things that one of the ways in which Pinto benefits from his multilinguality as a character is that he is very, very reflective. He thinks through everything and looks at various angles and retains language and repeats phrases himself. He is very much obsessed with language, like some of the people I know.
And we have another question.
Gonna have to be about the language, because that
Okay.
spoke to me. Last time I saw you, we were much younger, much thinner, and probably didn't know we'd be talking in
I was not
Washington.
thinner, but thank you.
Oh, congratulations on all of your books, but this is really close to all of our hearts. And so it's kind of two-sided questions. Do you think that now as an adult, when we reflect on Sarajevo and complexities of Sarajevo, did that sort of prepare us better for this sort of multilingual, multicultural, multifaceted lives that we all lead? And if so, thank God we had it. But also what you just mentioned, that these different languages also awaken different kinds of sensibilities and almost a slightly different logic. And linguistically speaking, some languages have fixed word order and the others don't. And that really affects the way we think and make decisions, but more so than anything else, how we feel and how we relate to people. Did you feel that throughout your life, through your private life, but your creative life and your writing processes, is that something that's interchangeable, and as you create, read, grow, that changes in different ways? And how can you compare that while looking at the same thing with your growing children that are also multilingual, multicultural?
Well, that's a very complex question. There's a notion in linguistics of macaronic language, and it's from macaroni, this Italian pasta, because presumably you hold languages like a handful of macaroni. And an example of a macaronic use of languages, which is common among immigrants and who might, within the family or within a circle of friends, might use words from several languages in the same sentence, right? Because in a situation like, get me the thing from the kitchen, I can't think of the word in English, then, and if I'm asking in English, then I will say the word in Latin, or the other way around, right? There are all these new different concepts. It will take 2 sentences to explain the thing in Bosnian. We can use a word in English in the Bosnian sentence. And I think that a lot of languages, other than those who were geographically isolated, at some point were macaronic. English was in the 12th century, when the Normans invaded the Anglo-Saxon lands. There was macaronic languages. Now half the words, not half, but many words are English. French source. In Bosnian, as I was saying, right, the Turkish words, the Persian and Arabic words by way of Turkish, German words, and now English, and now the diaspora is coming back, bringing in things from various languages. And so a living language is inherently macaronic. In other words, every language, unless geographically isolated, and those are relatively rare, is in some way or another multilingual. And so then the question becomes, what is valued in a society or in a person's ethical and aesthetical system, right? Do I want to have a fixed, simple, single identity, national, ethnic, whatever, that would then require a pure single language that is not complex and complicated? Or do I value this enormous complex? I believe that, every person is a universe, but the person decides who they are, right? I like hearing voices in various languages in my head and having arguments with, imaginary enemies who are also me. But that's not an easy way to live. There's a price for being the way you describe us as being, right? It's really, you have to juggle a lot of balls in the air all the time. But I value that. And the fact of the matter is, if we imagine a person of being inherently complex, the language being inherently macaronic, and any group of people being complicating things even more because everyone is different in various ways, then the only context for that to live and survive is democracy, right? That allows for the infinite variety of humans and respects every person in that context, regardless of their particular shape. And so then this is under assault everywhere in the world right now. And so it is difficult, but, I cannot give it up. I would never give that up. This is what I think people can be, should be, and, and many people are already and know it and own.
All right, on that cliffhanger, I think we're going to have to leave it there.
Yeah, next episode.
I want to say thanks very much to you all for coming. I want to say a huge thank you to Sasha Hemon for a fantastic talk. And I also want to say, buy a book, get it signed. Thank you very much.